Dial 720-386-9023 and use code 104091 *.
Se ofrecen servicios de interpretación en español para esta reunión del Consejo Municipal por teléfono. Marque el número 720-386-9023 y utilice el código 104091 #.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. City Clerk is the host of the Zoom meeting. Speakers will be able to unmute themselves when recognized. At this time, I'll call the Urban Renewal Authority meeting to order and ask the Secretary to call the roll.
Chair Huseman.
Present.
Vice Chair Allen Thomas.
Present.
Commissioner Madera.
Present.
Commissioner Davis. Commissioner Noble.
Present.
Commissioner Hurst. Commissioner Grimes. Commissioner Ford.
Present.
Commissioner Douglas.
Present.
Commissioner Boucher.
Present.
Commissioner Fairfield. Commissioner Lewis. Commissioner Tedesco. Chair Huseman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, sir. At this time, I'm looking for a motion to excuse those members not present. Vice Chair,
So moved.
Commissioner Madera.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to excuse those members not present. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries unanimously. We're going to move on to resolutions. First up, we have Resolution URA 2022-15, authorizing and approving tax increment revenue agreements. Does anyone on the URA board have any questions for staff? Seeing none, I'm looking for a motion and a second to adopt Resolution URA 2022-15 with an amendment to Exhibit A to change the percentage share for the URA to 95% and the share for the city to 5%. Commissioner Madera,
So moved.
Commissioner Ford.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adopt Resolution URA 2022-15 with an amendment to Exhibit A to change the percentage share for the URA to 95% and the share for the city to 5%. Is there any discussion? Seeing no requests for discussion, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries unanimously. We're going to move on to Resolution URA 2022-17, recommending the City Council approve Sand Creek Business Area Plan. Does anyone on the URA board have any questions for staff? Seeing none, I'm looking for a motion and a second to adopt Resolution URA 2022-17 with the Urban Renewal Plan and Blight Study. Commissioner Madera,
So moved.
Vice Chair.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to adopt Resolution URA 2022-17 with the Urban Renewal Plan and Blight Study. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion will carry unanimously. That concludes all the business for the Urban Renewal Authority. We will now adjourn to the NIGID meeting. We'll ask the Secretary to call the roll.
Chair Huseman.
Present.
Vice Chair Allen Thomas.
Present.
Board Member Madera.
Present.
Board Member Davis. Board Member Noble.
Present.
Board Member Hurst. Board Member Grimes. Board Member Ford.
Present.
Board Member Douglas.
Present.
Chair Huseman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. This time, I'm looking for a motion to excuse those members not present. Vice Chair.
So moved.
Commissioner Ford.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to excuse those members not present. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion will carry unanimously. Now I need a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Vice Chair.
So moved.
Board Member Madera.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. The motion will carry unanimously. We're going to move on to ordinances on second reading. First up is ordinance NIGID 180-22 for the inclusion of 9940 East 112th Avenue. Looking for a motion and a second to approve on second and final reading ordinance NIGID 180-22. Commissioner Madera,
So moved.
Vice Chair.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve on second and final reading ordinance NIGID 180-22. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, we'll do a voice, will the Secretary please take a roll call vote?
Board Member Madera.
Yes.
Board Member Davis?
Yes.
Board Member Noble?
No.
Board Member Hurst? Board Member Grimes? Board Member Ford?
Yes.
Board Member Douglas?
No.
Vice Chair Allen Thomas?
No.
Chair Huseman?
Yes.
Passes 4-3 with 2 excused absences.
Okay, next up, we're going to move to ordinance NIGID 181-22, inclusion of 10070 Potomac Street. I'm looking for a motion and a second to approve on second and final reading ordinance NIGID 181-22. Commissioner Madera,
So moved.
Commissioner Ford.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve on second and final reading ordinance NIGID 181-22. Is there any discussion? Okay. The NIGID was established circa 2020 in order to allow infrastructure improvements to take place in the northern range of the city, with the emphasis that all that growth in the northern part of the city would take place without burdening the southern part of the city to have to pay for that infrastructure. The votes tonight on these NIGID inclusions do not approve zoning, they do not approve development, they only approve inclusion in the NIGID to make sure that any type of development that does take place on these properties has to contribute towards that NIGID. Those bonds had originally sat out there with a mill levy of approximately 27. Over the years, they've been reduced down to 20 because more properties and more valuation has gone up inside the NIGID boundaries, allowing more revenue to be generated. Therefore, because of that, I will support any inclusion into the NIGID on any property that is going to increase the tax being put in there so that we can either pay those bonds off faster or allow the NIGID to further bonds in order to make more improvements for the northern range. Seeing no other requests for discussion, will the secretary please call for a roll call vote?
Board Member Madera?
Yes.
Board Member Davis? Yes. Board Member Noble?
Unlike East 112th Avenue, I am going to vote yes on this, but not for the reasons the mayor stated.
Thank you. Board Member Hurst? Board Member Grimes? Board Member Ford?
Yes.
Board Member Douglas?
Yes.
Vice Chair Allen Thomas?
Yes.
Chair Huseman?
Yes.
Passes 7 in favor, 2 excused absences.
Thank you, sir. This time I'm going to adjourn to the ECA GID meeting, and I will call the ECA GID meeting to order and ask the secretary to call the roll.
Chair Huseman?
Present?
Vice Chair Allen Thomas?
Present.
Board Member Madera?
Present.
Board Member Davis? Board Member Noble? Board Member Hurst? Board Member Grimes? Board Member Ford?
Present.
Board Member Douglas?
Present.
Chair Huseman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, sir. All right, first up is approval of minutes. Looking for a motion and a second to approve the minutes. And Commissioner Madera,
So moved.
Vice Chair.
Second the
I have a
motion.
motion and a second to approve the minutes. Oh, timeout. See, I got all mixed up. First up, I'm looking for a motion and a second to excuse those members not present. Commissioner Madera,
Move to excuse the members not present.
Vice Chair.
Second
I
the
have a motion
motion.
and a second to excuse those members not present. Is there any discussion? Seeing no requests for discussion, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion will carry unanimously. Now we'll move on to the approval of minutes. Commissioner Madera,
So moved.
Vice Chair.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries unanimously. We'll move on now to resolutions. We have Resolution ECA GID 22-02, the First Amendment to the IGA for the Third Creek West Regional Improvements. Does anybody on the board have any questions for staff?
I do.
Councilmember Noble.
Could you please give us the boundaries for the ECA GID? Bounded by which streets?
Currently, the ECA GID would include only the DIA Tech Center and Nexus North, I think they call it, or DIA Tech North. So that's west of Tower Road, from approximately 81st Avenue north to approximately 88th Avenue. Future inclusions will be wherever commercial or industrial property is developed.
Developed anywhere in Commerce City?
No. Anywhere east of the NIGID, which typically runs up to Tower Road. But again, the boundaries, basically, they don't absolutely follow Tower Road. It's better if we give you maps so you can see those areas.
Okay. I would appreciate having maps when I'm voting on this. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Is there any other discussion? Seeing no other requests for discussion, I'm looking for, or questions for staff, I'm looking for a motion and a second to adopt resolution ECA GID 22-02. Board Member Ford?
So moved.
Board Member Madera?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adopt resolution ECA GID 22-02. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. A motion will carry unanimously. I will now adjourn us to the ERA GID meeting and call the ERA GID meeting to order and ask the secretary to call the roll.
Chair Huseman,
Present.
Vice Chair Allen Thomas,
Present.
Board Member Madera,
Present.
Board Member Davis. Present. Board Member Noble,
Present.
Board Member Hurst, Board Member Grimes, Board Member Ford,
Present.
Board Member Douglas.
Present.
Chair Huseman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. At this time, I'm looking for a motion and a second to excuse those members not present. Board Member Madera,
So moved.
Vice Chair.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to excuse those members not present. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries unanimously. We'll move on to approval of the minutes. Looking for a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Board Member Madera,
So moved.
Vice Chair.
Second the
I have a
motion.
motion and a second to approve the minutes. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion will carry unanimously, and we're going to move on to resolutions. We have Resolution ERA GID 22-02, First Amendment to the IGA for the Third Creek West Regional Improvements. Does anyone on the board have any questions for staff?
I do.
Board Member Noble.
Yes. What are the boundaries of ERA GID?
Currently, there is only a small little parcel of land that forms the ERA GID. So as residential property joins the ERA GID, then the boundaries will expand to include those. Think of the two GIDs as Swiss cheese in the sense that what one covers, the other does not. So commercial and industrial goes into the ECA GID, residential goes into the ERA GID. And so they complement each other in the sense that whatever property develops as residential will join the ERA GID. Whatever property develops as commercial and industrial joins the ECA GID.
And are the payments favorable for the residential area compared to the commercial, or are they the same?
The mill levy rate was set when these were established. The residential is at 30 mills. The commercial is at 27 mills, and that was done to attract additional commercial.
Thank you.
Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, I have a motion and a second to adopt a resolution ERA GID 22-02. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. That motion will carry unanimously. We'll now adjourn to the study session, call the meeting to order. We have one presentation that is on the 2021 Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. I will invite Teresa Wilson, Deputy Finance Director, to introduce the presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and City Councilors. Thank you for the opportunity to present the city's 2021 audit information. Our Director of Finance, Cheryl Karstens, would like to apologize for not being able to attend tonight due to a family commitment. Materials in your packet include the financial audit presentation, the independent auditor's letter, which summarizes the auditor's opinions of the city's financial statements, the single audit report, which details required work related to federal funds, and the management's discussion and analysis, which provides a high-level and user-friendly summary of the city's financials. We did an RFP for audit services last year and selected Plant Moran as our new audit firm. This is their first year completing the city's audit. The annual audit is a lengthy process. It began with preliminary and year-end work last fall and was fully complete on June 14th, earlier this month. I would like to thank our finance staff for their efforts throughout the year. Completing the audit and financial statements would not be possible without their hard work. Hard copies of the 2021 Annual Comprehensive Financial Report will be distributed to you as soon as they are available. In the meantime, you can find a link to an electronic version of the 2021 ACFR within the council communication. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Tim St. Andrew, our audit engagement partner, and Nicolette Acho, our senior audit manager, to you. They are here with us remotely tonight and will present additional 2021 audit information to you. We also welcome any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. So I will kick us off, and Teresa, it looks like you have the presentation up on screen. So first off, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having us here to present on the results of the December 31st, 2021 financial statement audit and single audit. As Teresa mentioned, my name is Tim St. Andrew, the engagement partner, and with me is Nikki Acho, the manager. And what we have for you tonight is really covering three deliverables that come out of the audit process. One is the financial statement audit, and we'll cover the opinion letter that's included in the city's annual comprehensive financial report, as well as a high-level financial summary. We'll cover the required post-audit communications, and then lastly, we'll cover the federal single audit, which is the audit of the city's federal awards. Before we get into the deliverables, I did want to first thank the city team, Cheryl, Teresa, Sue, really the whole team, everybody that we worked with for their help during the audit. As Teresa had mentioned, the audit process, it really starts back in January when the year-end close process begins. So it's a 5 to 6 month timeline to really be able to prepare for the audit, close the books, get the work papers ready, and then actually go through the audit and close the audit. And so it's a lot of work, and we certainly appreciate your team's efforts. The next slide here, I just wanted to briefly cover the main components of the annual comprehensive financial report for those that may not be as familiar with it. So first is the auditor's report letter. This is our opinion on the report. We don't provide an opinion on whether the numbers or the disclosures are good or bad, healthy or unhealthy. Our opinion is really only covering the fact that the numbers and disclosures are materially accurate in accordance with the applicable accounting requirements. Then we have the management's discussion and analysis. And this is a summary of the city's financial information, including comparisons to the prior year. It provides information on the financial highlights, budgetary highlights, information on the city's debt, city's capital assets, and other relevant information. And then we have the basic financial statements and the footnotes. And this is really what I would think is the meat of the financial report. This would include the balance sheet, the income statement, and then where applicable, the cash flow statements. Then we have the required and other supplemental information. This would include the budgetary comparison schedules and the combining financial statements. And then lastly, in the back, we have the statistical section, which provides some financial information with financial trends, and then it has information on revenue capacity, debt capacity, demographic and economic information, and operating information. And these are all presented as 10-year trends. And so you can, using the current year and then going back 9 years, you can compare the trends and see how things have changed over the years. Okay, next slide, Teresa, thank you. Okay, so as it relates to the auditor's opinion letter, you will see, if you were to compare this year's letter to last year's letter, you will see that the layout and content of the letter are a bit different. And that's because we as auditors had to implement SAS 134. And part of that implementation was changing the information that gets presented in the auditor's report letter, changing layout and the format, but really the most important part is that first part, and it is an unmodified opinion that we issued. And that means that it is a clean opinion, and the readers can rely on the financial statements, the figures, the disclosures, the information are accurately presented. We did include an emphasis of matter paragraph in the report letter, which notifies the users of the financial statements that the 2020 financial statements have been restated, and to see note 4D for more information. And I'll get into that a little bit more in a couple minutes here. And then we did have two financial statement audit findings. And I'll bounce around a little bit here, so I apologize. But the financial statement audit findings can actually be found in the single audit report, which is a separate attachment. And on page 11 of the report, and this goes into the note 4D reference, the city, the finance team did become aware in 2021 of a transaction that actually occurred in 2020 related to the Greyhound Park project, and it involved assets held for resale and certain water rights that should have been recorded back in 2020, but the finance team worked through the transaction in 2021, and because of the significance of the transaction and the dollar amounts involved, the city did have to restate 2020 fund balance in that position to apply that transaction as if it happened in 2020. And then on page 12, this relates to the Commerce City Housing Authority, but there was a discreetly presented component unit of the Housing Authority that was not presented in the prior year financial statements. And as we went through the GASB 61 analysis with the Housing Authority, it was determined that Pinecrest at Commerce City should have been presented as a discreetly presented component unit. And similar to the first item, they had to go back and change the financial statements, restate the financial statements as if that component unit were included all along. And Teresa, if you want to move to the next slide, we have just a couple slides on the financial highlights. First would be the net position trends. And net position is really what we refer to as the equity on the full accrual basis. And so what that means is that when you take all of the city's assets, both current and long-term, back out all of the city's liabilities, both current and long-term, that's your ending balance there would be net position. And as you can see on the slide, the city has experienced 7 straight years of net position growth. And net position has 3 buckets. So the first being net investment in capital assets. And you can see this at the bottom of the slide there. This balance represents the city's capital assets. So the infrastructure, the vehicles, equipment, less any capital related debt that's associated with those capital assets gets you to this net investment number. And you can see that the net position attributed to that net investment in capital assets was $194.8 million at the end of 2021, up about $11 million from last year. The second bucket is restricted net position, and that would be net position, as the name implies, that is restricted. So it could be related to grants that the city may have received that would be restricted because they're not spent yet, or revenue sources that are restricted for spending on certain items. And that balance at the end of the year was $54.3 million, down $1.5 million from last year. And then the final bucket was unrestricted net position, which stands at $162.6 million at the end of 2021. And on the next slide, taking the change from 2021 to 2020, you'd see that the net position did increase by $36.6 million in 2021. And that is mainly due to a few items here. One, tax revenue increased $29.7 million from last year. And then charges for services increased $6.6 million compared to last year. Now those increases were offset by an increase in the expenses by $7.3 million. Most notably, the most significant increases were in public works and parks, rec, and golf. And then on the next slide here, we'll go down a level and just talk general fund. And to start at the bottom, you'd see that the total general fund balance at the end of 2021 was $115.5 million. This is an increase of $29 million from 2020. And then if we can go back up on the slide here, you see that there are a few different components to fund balance. So the first being non-spendable fund balance at $224,000. This would be related to items that aren't in a spendable form, like prepaid items, inventory. Second bucket is restricted fund balance. And the balance there was about $20 million, 3.7 of which was restricted for table reserve, and then $16.2 million restricted for the 2K capital outlay and operations. And the city had $5.4 million assigned related to the defined contribution plan. And then the final bucket is unassigned, which stands at $89.9 million at the end of the year. And of that, 14.6, as you can see here, is unassigned, but set aside for safeguard reserves, $8.8 million set aside for operating reserves, and then $66.4 million is really available to spend or discretionary unassigned fund balance. Any questions on the first 6 or 7 slides there before I turn it over to Nikki to cover the required post-audit communication?
Does anybody on council have any questions at this time? I don't see anything, sir. Please go on.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, Nikki.
Thanks, Tim. The end of audit letter, which is included as a separate document, is what closes the loop on the communication we're required to have with council and is a follow-up to the pre-audit letter that was distributed to council in April. The letter again discusses what our responsibility is under the auditing standards and states that we did perform the audit according to the plan previously communicated to you in that pre-audit letter. Some of the key items to note from the letter include that there were no transactions entered into by the city lacking authoritative guidance. There were no significant transactions that had been recognized in a different period than when the transaction occurred. There were no difficulties encountered in performing the audit, and we had no disagreements with management. The financial statement findings that Tim covered are included in this letter as well. And if you look at page 5 of the letter, this is a summary of unrecorded possible adjustments. There was one journal entry identified as part of our audit that the city deemed to be immaterial to the financial statements as a whole. And we concurred with that conclusion. And so that entry was passed on and not reflected in the final ACFR. However, it's communicated here for transparency and relates to the accrual of general leave time that employees have earned as of the end of the year. So moving on, I'm going to switch gears to the federal audit. So the city was required to have a separate federal compliance audit this year. This is always triggered by the spending of more than $750,000 of federal funding in any given year. So on page 7 of the report, you can see that the city spent about $2.8 million compared to $6.2 million in the prior year. And that decrease is a result of coronavirus relief funding that didn't recur again in 2021. There were 2 federal programs that we tested as part of our audit, and that was CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, and Emergency Rental Assistance, both of which had unmodified opinions, which is the highest level of assurance we can give that the city materially complied with the compliance requirements set forth by the Office of Management and Budget. And so during our testing of CDBG, though, we did identify a few deficiencies as part of our audit procedures. And so if you're looking at the single audit report, starting on page 13 is where the federal audit findings start. And the first one is related to the financial report that is submitted to HUD, the Housing and Urban Development, along with the city's annual CDBG performance report. So at the time of our audit procedures, the financial report had not been reconciled to the underlying accounting records. And although it was eventually reconciled, our recommendation is that the city implement a process to ensure that financial reports are reconciled to the underlying records at the time of submission. The second federal finding on page 14 of the report is related to the rehabilitation projects within the CDBG program. So the guidance states that when CDBG funds are used for rehab, the grantee must ensure that the work was properly completed. However, the city didn't maintain documentation to support that this had been done. And so our recommendation is that the city implement a process to ensure that rehab work is inspected upon completion in accordance with the guidance. And then the last finding in this report is surrounding reporting requirements under the Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act, which requires certain reports to be filed when a direct funded organization passes funds through to subrecipients, which was the case for the city this year. And so there were 4 subrecipients that met this criteria. However, the required reports were not filed. And so our recommendation is that the city implement a process just to ensure that all required reports are filed and filed timely.
Thank you, Nikki. So that would conclude our presentation. So again, we'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Councilmember Noble?
Thank you very much for the report. Last year, the report was glowing. Are you the same auditors?
No, we are a new audit firm, and this would be our first year auditing the city.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so you caught several things that were overlooked in last year's audit. It appears.
Yeah, that's a tough to answer that one. I'm not sure. I don't recall if, especially related to the single audit, if this particular program was tested, or perhaps the issues that we found weren't present last year.
Okay, and what are the implications of, or the impacts of a material, of what's designated as a material weakness?
Mm-hmm. And so the impact from a single audit standpoint, so the granting agency, they obviously, all of them will see these reports, and the city already prepared a corrective action plan that speaks to the issues that were found, and then what the plan is to remediate those issues. And I would say really the same thing on the financial statement audit side. I wouldn't really say there are consequences or ramifications, but they are items that were found. Mm-hmm. And the city finance team is aware of them, and I know they're working diligently to look at the processes and the controls to make sure that going forward, at least these issues are taken care of.
Okay, these both involved housing, Mr. Tinklenberg, and is it something that we simply didn't know how to do, or did someone not have the experience to do it? What was the problem with this?
I would have to defer to the auditors or Ms. Wilson in terms of the background, the circumstances. I don't know the particular circumstances. I would point out, though, that in the 21 years I've worked with the city, every audit firm has found something every year. That's what they're paid to do, is to find oversights. Ms. Wilson, do you know offhand the background on that housing issue?
I would just add overall that, every year in the financial transactions associated with a year are unique to that year, and each year can be different and challenging in its own respects. I do know that this is the Housing Authority's first single audit. They were granted that $1.6 million in federal pass-through funding as part of the Housing Authority consortium that they're working with, Adams County and Brighton. And we were given $1.6 million to use for rental assistance to benefit our residents. So that was a rather substantial program. The finding with the Housing Authority relating to the component unit, that was reviewed, from a very careful perspective by Plant Moran, and it was just determined that Pinecrest should be included in the Housing Authority's financials as a component unit. So that was just a conclusion that they reached based on the careful and thoughtful analysis that they did. And it doesn't, it just means that we need to include that moving forward. And that may change if the property is bought, and that would be presented differently in the financials moving forward, depending on how that unfolds. But that's about the extent of my knowledge on that.
Thank you very much. Pinecrest jumped out at me because we'd had issues there, so the name stuck in my mind also. And I can understand that this might have been new because of the generosity that occurred from the federal government during COVID. Thank you.
Well, I'm not completely sure about all the reasons that Pinecrest was brought in that too. I know there were some issues that came up this year in regards to litigation and the relationship between the city, the housing authority, and the apartments and the way they're managed, which may have also played a role in how that played out as well. And that's something that I attempted to bring to council in an executive session a while back, but we weren't able to get to that because we don't think we had the votes that night, weren't able to extend the meeting that night. So I'm looking for another way to get that information in front of council at some point.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for the auditor or staff? I don't see anybody wanting to speak, so thank you very much to Plant Moran for your work this year, and also Ms. Wilson, thank you for being here, and congratulations, Ms. Carson, on the enlistment of your daughter into the armed forces. We will now move on to council reports. We will start with Mr. Tinklenberg.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to let you know that we're watching the COVID rates, which are rising again. Thankfully, this variety does not seem to be as deadly as the original variety. However, there are people who are succumbing to it. But the Denver metro area has a positivity rate over 12%, so certainly need to keep our eye on it. Wanted to let you know also that the city manager's office is working with Adams County on a draft RFP for URA formation, and that would be at the RTD light rail station at 72nd Avenue in Colorado. And we anticipate the release of that RFP no later than August of this year. Staff has reached the first milestone with the Criminal Justice Center study and assessment. The project is on schedule for a discussion with council the first part of August of this year as well. And then given conversations at the end of the June 13 meeting on metro districts to shift the study session from sometime in June to the first week of July, we would need a motion from council to affirm that request, and that could be done in your special meeting following this meeting. And then also wanted to draw your attention to an email that Jason just sent out at the beginning of this meeting, and it's regarding the monthly CIP report. That will be replaced by a map that will be basically, would you call it interactive? Basically, interactive map, and so you won't receive the monthly report, but you will receive that map link instead. And then in terms of community development, they're at 167 active entitlement applications, so a little bit down from previous months. And so far this year, 558 residential permits have been issued. And then building inspections is still going hot and heavy. They've done 18,411 inspections year to date this year. In terms of code enforcement, currently they're running at 98% compliance rate, and that's over 7,928 cases. In terms of economic development, the Third Creek West public-private partnership groundbreaking is scheduled for July 14, and that'll be from 10 to 11 in the morning. And that'll be at the northeast corner of 104th Avenue and E470. That has also been added to your calendars as council members. And then for Public Works, bids have been received for 96th Avenue for the 2K Cinderella bond. And Parks Maintenance VHEs, they've gained a little ground. They're up to 22 of the 32 positions now filled. I also wanted to let you know that Public Works has engaged a consultant to prepare a fleet assessment, If you recall, we've, for the last several years, been on a lease program with Enterprise Leasing, and this will be an assessment of that to see if that's been cost-effective, or should we return back to purchasing vehicles as we did years ago. And then there's been some mowing on the Second Creek open space, perimeter fence lines. The Pioneer Park, the staff is getting the park ready for the Sparkler Tournament. And if you recall, that's a big softball tournament that happens all through the metro area. And it's pretty much Colorado-wide, as I recall, in terms of teams that play. Still having problems with dead grass, which is a holdover from this very dry winter that we had. But staff are working on that, as well as weed control. And then they're planning on finishing the crack seal on Highway 2 for this season. And they'll finish Highway 2 north of Rosemary in the fall. So crack sealing south of Rosemary is being completed now. And then plans are underway for the Fourth Fest event, and that'll be basically Dick's Sporting Goods Park and Prairie Gateway open space area. Finally, for PRG, they're the ones that are active in the Fourth Fest with the Colorado Rapids. And family activities will be held from 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock. And it'll feature free activities such as the climbing wall, trampoline bounce, and other type of activities like that. And in light of Fourth Fest activities, Eagle Point and Bison Ridge recreation centers will be closed during that time. Any questions on any of that?
Thank you, Mr. Tinklenberg. Does anybody on council have any questions regarding the city manager's report? Councilmember Douglas.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, Roger, you mentioned an RFP on 72nd in Colorado. Could you go into that just a little bit more?
Yeah, I can give you a little background. Mr. Rogers has far more information on that, but basically it's an exploration of what would be involved with forming a urban renewal area for the area around the RTD station. Jason?
Thank you, Roger. So the RFP in discussion was a council work plan item identified for, I will actually say for the last 2 years, in staff exploring a partnership, a relationship with the county, and to what Roger stated, forming an urban renewal district to help with redevelopment, catalytic development opportunities to support the station area master plan. So we have been able to work with the county over the past 6 months and them being able to gain support from their elected officials to continue moving forward with us here at the city on what that might look like for that portion of the city. I would say this urban renewal formation would be somewhat different than what we've seen in the past. We have seen more site-specific districts. For instance, Sand Creek is only one property. This would be, or Mahai Greyhound Park, which is more akin to one property, Victory Crossing, akin to one property or one development focus. The RTD light rail station would be more similar to a Derby approach, which is a district-wide approach, which would be able to benefit in this aspect more so than Derby, residents and commercial business owners with being able, through beautification efforts, with improved infrastructure and or supporting new development that would bring in, I would say, attainable priced housing and or, once again, non-commercial opportunity, or excuse me, non-residential opportunities to support a live, work, play environment. So that's been our focus, and that's what we have been working towards based on our current work plan that we are operating under.
So will we expect to get more information on that and perhaps a study session on it so that we could really understand what's projected there?
At the appropriate time, yes, ma'am. I mean, right now, we're simply talking about releasing an RFP for them to go through what I would call a stepped process. One, looking at blight conditions is the area in which we want to define blighted per the state statutes under the code, which we would provide what I would call it a urban renewal refresher as to what those are and what we have to look at and what a qualified consultant has been able to determine based on their expertise. We would also look at a robust community engagement, given that we are dealing with a very different population base. And what I mean by that, by ownership, than what we've typically seen in our most recent URA formation plans, right? We've been dealing with single ownership. Here we're dealing with multiple. And as part of the process under the state law, we're required to take into account, if there are any objections to that, how it shapes the ultimate district boundary. And then there's ultimately other steps along the way as it pertains to the negotiations with taxing agencies, the formation or the development of an actual urban renewal area plan that supports the comp planning and or land development code efforts in place. So we plan on, once again, taking that step approach to be able to bring very, what I would call fruitful discussions and very robust discussions with respect to that state law and those requirements to you all throughout this process. At this stage, bringing any information forward would be speculative in nature, and I'd rather have more finite information to share with you all to be able to get feedback and direction on our next steps.
Well, I kind of like to see it at the speculative state, because once something is put into place, then we have a hard time giving input, and so does the community. So once something is actually put into place, that's when people feel like they lose the ability to have input, and they feel like the plans are already in place, and so they feel left out. I don't want that to happen again.
Okay, just to further clarify that with a finer point, when I say speculative in nature, what I'm talking about is with the release of the RFP to select a consultant to work with us. Once we have that consultant, we have no issues coming before the council with what will ultimately be the boundaries, the plan, how we use TIF in support of the community, what we hear back from the community. So this is well before, I would say this is somewhere between 8 to 12 months before we actually have any plan in place. And like I said, we are required by state law, and outside of that, we have a cultural purpose and a reason why we should be engaging in our community to being able to get that feedback to help determine what is the ultimate boundaries that are determined by both here, the county, and the city.
Thank you for the information. I appreciate the ability to give my input as well, though, so thank you. Let me see. Roger, could you explain the 2K Cinderella bond? What does that mean at 96th Avenue? You mentioned that.
So earlier this year, we had the question that we brought to City Council was, do you want to refinance the existing 2K bonds and then use the remainder of the bond authorization to additional projects? So the financing is called Cinderella just from the standpoint of how it's structured. That's what the financial gurus call it. But
I appreciate that. I just didn't understand the terminology, so
Yeah,
thank you for
sure.
explaining that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for the city manager? Councilmember Noble.
Mr. Rogers, were you referring to 72nd Colorado in the conversation with Councilmember Douglas?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and you'll recall that I had a conversation with you last week about the executive director of the Urban Land Institute, who came to the BREDAC meeting and discussed the TAP or stamp for 72nd in Colorado. And at that time, I suggested that it went so well for BREDAC for us to actually know what's being suggested for that area, that we should have this as a study session going forward. And I would like to have someone from the Urban Land Institute actually make that presentation, just as they did to BREDAC. It was very useful, and I think the council would be very appreciative to hear it because of the scope of the area that we're talking about. At our last meeting, there was a developer who came before us and showed what's expected for 72nd, and we haven't even discussed that. That person used an element of the ULI report, which hasn't come before the city council in the almost a year since we participated in that.
To your request, ma'am, I think we can make that happen. That's not a problem at all with a study session on the ULI TAP report. I know we had individual participation from some of our council members, but
You did not
excuse
have
me.
council members who were at the summary when it was presented, and you said that to me at the
If you will
conference.
let me finish, ma'am. I know we had some individual participation, but it is worthwhile to bring it to the full body so that there can be an understanding and appreciation for what was recommended as a process and a step for us as staff to move forward with. So we can work on being able to bring the ULI in to make a presentation. Not an issue at all. As it relates to, I think, Roger, you wanted to speak on a point? Okay. I covered what he wanted to speak on.
Good, thank you, that would be appreciated. And I wanted to speak to Mr. Tinklenberg about the work schedule. It was on the list as something to discuss, and I see that the Metro District discussion or Special District discussion is set for the study session on July 25th, but there's another item on the agenda as well for discussion, and we had voted for a single topic study session.
So one of the things that I wanted to bring up during council admin business, and we'll wait to hold that conversation, is that obviously a conversation that was held on June 13th about soliciting a date in July, given that trying to find a date within June would not be, staff would not be able to do such. So wanted to make sure that we got a motion in front of you, or a request for a motion in front of you to set a new date for a special date, either a Wednesday or Thursday, within the month of July for that conversation before coming back to council for a more robust, interactive discussion with our residents and our community, our development community members in August per the motion when the item failed back in May. But that was going to be a part of our conversation here during the special meeting.
Since it's on the work schedule as July 25th, that would, and that is a Monday that we typically have a meeting, it would seem that that would make sense to leave it at that time instead of calling an extra meeting for the council.
Do you want me to answer, Mr. Rogers?
Go ahead.
The work schedule that was sent out last Thursday as part of the city manager's report has the LDC amendments, PUD process, and the sign code study session for July 25th. There's not a metropolitan district item listed on that work schedule that went out.
I would think that the LCD amendment process has to do with metro districts, do they not?
They do not. They deal with the PUD zone district direction and support that we received from council at the end of last year.
Okay, then we have a very crowded agenda again for the month of July, and I will be interested to hear what the council thinks. This was supposed to occur in June, and we're having a discussion on June 27th about postponing it when in fact it just should have been scheduled. That was our vote, was to schedule it for June 27th. I mean, was to schedule it for June. That was the deadline, and I made the motion, and Councilmember Grimes seconded it, and it was unanimous.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Tinklenberg? Councilmember Douglas.
Yes. Thank you one more time. So you mentioned re-examining the fleets. Are we going to be looking at electrifying our fleets in the future?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and tackle that. Three's the charm. What I will say is yes, ma'am. As part of the fleet assessment and evaluation, this actually stems back to a previous conversation under the previous city council. This as the fleet assessment and vehicle program was coming up. Well, in actuality, to be more accurate, the budgeted amount that was approved by council was exceeded. Therefore, we needed to have an approval by that council to make an adjustment to align the contracted amount with what was budgeted for our current contract with Enterprise. In that discussion, it became very apparent and one recommended by our council of reassessing our fleet and our proposal, or excuse me, our existing program with either a lease to buy or a lease in return or an outright purchase, and to determine what is the most appropriate and financially sound approach going forward for the organization. In that was also identified to look at the trend and the growing need of electrifying vehicles as part of our fleet. So this assessment with the consultant that we have will conduct that and bring those recommendations for your deliberation and ultimately direction to staff here in the November timeframe of this year.
Any other questions for Mr. Tinklenberg? Okay, Mr. Hayter.
I don't have anything for the group at this time. I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has any issues they want to address.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Hayter? Okay, any council members wishing to make a report? Councilmember Noble?
Do we have an update on 112th and the CDA issue?
In response to the email I received from you earlier, I did follow up with Mr. Rogers earlier, and he sent me some information that I'm still trying to get through, and I'm going to get back to him and then get an answer back to you as soon as I possibly can.
Thank you very much.
Okay, seeing no council members wish to make a report, I'll be brief in mine. Thursday evening, I met with the Crowley Company. They're the landowners for Third Creek West. Saturday evening, we had the U.S. Women's National Team play here at Dick's Sporting Goods Park in Commerce City. It was a well-attended event, and I think really put on a good event for to showcase Commerce City. So thank you to everybody who made that possible. That's all I have for a report. We will now adjourn to the special meeting, and we'll take a 5-minute recess so people can use the facilities, get something to drink prior to getting into that agenda. Meeting of the City of Commerce City City Council to order and ask the clerk to call the roll.
Mayor Huseman.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas.
Present.
Councilmember Madera.
Present.
Councilmember Davis. Councilmember Noble.
Present?
Councilmember Hurst. Councilmember Grimes. Councilmember Ford.
Present.
Councilmember Douglas.
Present.
Mayor Huseman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. I'm looking for a motion and a second to excuse those members not present. Councilmember Madera,
So moved.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Second the
I
motion.
have a motion and a second to excuse those members not present. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. A motion will carry unanimously. We are going to move on to resolutions. Resolution 2022-56, authorizing and approving an IGA with the URA for Sand Creek Business Area. Does anyone on council have any questions for staff? Seeing no request for questions, I'm looking for a motion and a second to adopt Resolution 2022-56 with an amendment to Exhibit A to change the percentage share for the URA to 95% and the share for the city to 5%. Councilmember Madera,
So moved.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Second the motion.
I have a motion and a second to adopt Resolution 2022-56 with an amendment to Exhibit A to change the percentage share for the URA to 95% and the share for the city to 5%. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, will the clerk please read the title?
Resolution 2022-56, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Commerce City, Colorado, authorizing and approving an intergovernmental agreement with the Urban Renewal Authority of the City of Commerce City for the Sand Creek Business Area.
All right, I have a motion and a second to adopt Resolution 2022-56 with an amendment. The title has been read. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. The motion will carry unanimously. We're going to move on to ordinances on first reading. Ordinance 2399, recognition of the Colorado Department of Local Affairs grant. Does anyone on council have any questions for staff? Councilmember Noble.
Thank you very much, Mayor. One of the sessions that I attended at the CML conference was the Department of Local Affairs panel or discussion. They had a tremendous number of grants and money that they were giving away. All sorts of different programs that seemed applicable here in Commerce City. Do we have a grant, someone who's in charge of seeking out, pursuing grants and so forth, and matching them up with various departments?
Yes, ma'am. At one time, we did. That position has been vacant for some time, and we are in discussions with the Director of Finance in terms of what would be the best way to structure that position. So I'm not sure, Ms. Blakeman, do you have any other information about that?
Not really anything addition to that. We're hoping to have something to look at soon, possibly into the 23 budget. So she's working on it.
Okay, that would be great because it was millions and millions and millions of dollars for programs, and especially things like electrification and so forth. So that would be really great. Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions for staff regarding ordinance 2399? Seeing no requests for questions, I'm looking for a motion and a second to introduce by council as seated and approve on first reading ordinance 2399. Councilmember Madera,
So moved.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Second the motion.
Have a motion and a second to introduce by council as seated and approve on first reading ordinance 2399. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, will the clerk please read the title and take a roll call vote?
Ordinance 2399, an ordinance amending the 2022 budget of the City of Commerce City, Colorado by the recognition of the Colorado Department of Local Affairs grant in the amount of $13,000 for Defense Council first appearance and the authorization of the expenditure thereof. Councilmember Madera.
Yes.
Councilmember Davis.
Yes.
Councilmember Noble.
Yes.
Councilmember Hurst. Councilmember Grimes. Councilmember Ford.
Yes.
Councilmember Douglas.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas.
Yes.
Mayor Huseman.
Yes.
Passes unanimously with 2 excused absences.
Thank you, sir. We'll move on to ordinance 2400, recognition of the Tony Gramscis Youth Services Grant Funds. Does anybody on council have any questions for staff? Seeing no request for questions, I'm looking for a motion and a second to introduce by council as seated and approve on first reading ordinance 2400. Mayor Pro Tem,
So moved.
Councilmember Madera,
Second.
Have a motion and a second to introduce by council as seated and approve on first reading ordinance 2400. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, will the clerk please read the title and take a roll call vote?
Ordinance 2400, an ordinance amending the 2022 budget of the City of Commerce City, Colorado by the recognition of the Tony Gramscis Youth Service TGYS grant funds in the amount of $79,739 for the support of activities and classes to community youth and the authorization of the expenditures thereof. Councilmember Madera?
Yes.
Councilmember Davis?
Yes.
Councilmember Noble?
Yes.
Councilmember Hurst? Councilmember Grimes? Councilmember Ford?
Yes.
Councilmember Douglas?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas?
Yes.
Mayor Huseman?
Yes.
Passes unanimously with 2 excused absences.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to ordinance 2403, recognition of the Colorado Department of Transportation grant. Does anybody on council have any questions for staff? Seeing none, looking for a motion and a second to introduce by council as seated and approve on first reading ordinance 2403. Mayor Pro Tem,
So moved.
Councilmember Madera.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to introduce by council as seated and approve on first reading ordinance 2403. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, will the clerk please read the title and take a roll call vote?
Ordinance 2403, an ordinance amending the 2022 budget of the City of Commerce City, Colorado by the recognition of the Colorado Department of Transportation grant in the amount of $13,000 for driving under the influence DUI enforcement efforts and the authorization of the expenditure thereof. Councilmember Madera?
Yes.
Councilmember Davis?
Yes.
Councilmember Noble?
Yes.
Councilmember Hurst? Councilmember Grimes? Councilmember Ford?
Yes.
Councilmember Douglas?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas?
Yes.
Mayor Huseman?
Yes.
Passes unanimously with 2 excused absences.
Thank you. Lastly, we have ordinance 2404, recognition of the Colorado Department of Human Services grant. Does anybody on council have any questions for staff? Seeing no request for questions, I'm looking for a motion and a second to introduce by council as seated and approve on first reading ordinance 2404. Councilmember Madera.
So moved.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Second the motion.
Have a motion and a second to introduce by council as seated and approve on first reading ordinance 2404. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, will the clerk please read the title and take a roll call vote?
Ordinance 2404, an ordinance amending the 2022 budget of the City of Commerce City, Colorado by the recognition of the Colorado Department of Human Services grant in the amount of $79,449 for support licensed facilities that service children thereof. Councilmember Madera?
Yes.
Councilmember Davis?
Yes.
Councilmember Noble?
Yes.
Councilmember Hurst? Councilmember Grimes? Councilmember Ford?
Yes.
Councilmember Douglas?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas?
Yes.
Mayor Huseman?
Yes.
Passes unanimously with 2 excused absences.
Thank you. That concludes all the ordinances we have for this evening. We'll now move on to administrative council business. We will start with the discussion regarding Juneteenth as a paid holiday. We'll invite Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas to introduce the item and make a motion.
Thank you, Mayor. To start off, I would just like to read a letter that I have, and I sent it out. I requested that it be sent out today to the mayor and all city council members. And it is from the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. It's the NAACP. And it's dated today. Dear members of City Council, I'm writing to you as president of the Rocky Mountain NAACP Colorado, Montana, and Wyoming State Conference. I was made aware that at the June 6, 2022 Commerce City Council meeting, a proclamation was made recognizing Juneteenth in Commerce City. However, the city took no other action to formally recognize Juneteenth. Juneteenth is recognized as a federal holiday that has been formally adopted by the state of Colorado and Adams County. All governmental employees of each of these entities are given a paid day off, and governmental activities do not take place. The NAACP State Conference is fully supportive of Commerce City, Colorado, following the county and state, and is formally adopting Juneteenth as a city holiday. It is the appropriate way for the city to recognize the emancipation of enslaved people in the United States. I strongly urge you to adopt Juneteenth as a city holiday to be formally recognized in 2023 and onward. Respectfully, Portia Prescott, NAACP President for Colorado, Montana, and Wyoming State Conference. and I would just like to add, Juneteenth is a federal holiday in the United States commemorating the emancipation of enslaved African Americans. U.S. President Abraham Lincoln announced the Emancipation Proclamation on September 22nd, 1862. On June 17, 2021, President Biden made Juneteenth a federal holiday. On May 2nd, 2022, Governor Polis signed the designation into law, making Juneteenth a state holiday in Colorado. On June 6, 2022, at our city council meeting, I read the Juneteenth proclamation, which was signed by our mayor. Not only does Juneteenth recognize freedom being granted, it also reminds us of the struggles for freedom that Blacks endured. It took another 156 years for America to formally recognize this day as an important day in our history. My father grew up on a young blood plantation and was forced to be a water boy in Soperton, Georgia. My mother had to pick cotton on a plantation in Aiken, South Carolina, and I have heard all of these horrific stories my parents, grandparents, and relatives had to endure. My mother was forced to pick the cotton in the cotton fields, and I have stories where she wasn't even provided with gloves, anyone in the cotton fields, and she used to pray daily if the Lord helped her get out of the cotton fields, she would never buy anything cotton herself. Sadly, 157 years was not enough for Commerce City, and we must wait another year. I was disappointed and concerned that the city staff and city council had a city council meeting on June 20th of this year, the day Juneteenth was observed nationally and statewide, particularly after the city's proclamation. For these reasons, I would like to make a motion that the city draft an ordinance by the next city council meeting for all city employees to have the day off as a paid holiday for Juneteenth on the day the federal government and the state observes the holiday. If the holiday falls on a day when there are city council meetings, there will be no city council meetings conducted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Appreciate you sharing that story of your family. I have a motion for an ordinance to be drafted recognizing Juneteenth as a paid holiday in the city of Commerce City and the fact that there will not be any council meetings on the day it is recognized in the city, and that is a motion that I am proud myself to second. Is there any discussion?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Councilmember Douglas.
I was wholeheartedly going to second this motion. And so thank you for seconding it, but I was going to be proud to second this motion. I spent a really emotional day last Monday. The fact that we had a meeting and the fact that we had a meeting that was jam-packed until really late in the evening forced me to spend my entire Sunday and Saturday night preparing for that meeting. And I missed Father's Day, and I missed going down to 5 Points for the Juneteenth celebration. I found so much that was on the agenda that night that wasn't necessary. And I felt like that was on purpose, and I really couldn't understand it. I became skeptical of the reason for having an agenda such as that on that particular day. I was forwarded an email, and I responded to that email. And what I said was, the response reminded me of the posts that my husband Steve got during the Black Lives Matter movement. And what he got from a lot of his white customers at King Soopers, who he has always considered them as friends, said, "What are you doing? Why are you saying Black Lives Matter when it's all lives matter?" You have no idea how hard that was for me to take the reins and write a response in his behalf to those people who just didn't get it. And I felt the same way last Monday. It was like, okay, we're going to include all these other people who have experienced some kind of disparity in their lives. But the point was missed. This is about Black disparity and what my kids experience all the time. My grandson just went to a camp in South Dakota because that's where his mom is from. That's where I'm from. But he went to a camp, and you wouldn't believe the comments that he got from other kids in that camp. He's 14 years old. When he was 7, he came to me and he said, Grandma, well, he calls me Nani. He said, Nani, I don't want to go to the school that I'm going to anymore because some of the kids say things to me. One of the kids actually said to him, you know, I can treat you any way I want to because it used to be that people who look like me owned people who look like you. And I can tell you what to do. He was 7 years old. He couldn't even explain to me what he felt like. I can't begin to understand what it's like to wake up in the skin that my family finds themselves in. I worry about them daily because I don't know if the wrong person is going to pull them over and things are going to go wrong. And I'm going to get that knock on the door. So for me, this was highly emotional. It triggered emotions that I can't even explain to you. And I wasn't going to attend last Monday's meeting. I was so distraught that I didn't feel like I could pull myself together to come. But then I thought, what about the people who elected me? What about the people who expect me to look beyond myself and to show up? And so I did. I did it for those people because that's why I'm here. I'm also here for all of the people who find themselves having to fight the system daily, having to work several jobs just to have to pay the rent and make the choices between, do I pay for my medical expenses, my pharmaceuticals? How do I put food on the table? What if I face homelessness? living in a place where you have to face health impacts because of the environment, but you can't afford to move somewhere else. And people not understanding that. And this is why I'm here. So, thank you for bringing this forward. I will be fully supportive of this motion. And I thank you for the opportunity to express myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Douglas, for sharing with us your vulnerabilities. Anybody else have any comments or discussion to make regarding the motion on the table? Seeing none, again, I have a motion and a second to direct staff to prepare an ordinance to create Juneteenth as a city-paid holiday and to not conduct council business on the day it is recognized. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Mr. Mayor.
Aye.
Yes, Mr. Hayter.
I just wanted to note, just so that you're all aware before you vote, and I should have tried to interject, but I was trying to respect the space there. We have not in the past typically adopted or recognized holidays by ordinance. We can certainly do that in this situation. Typical pattern, or typically, the holidays that the city has adopted have been set out in employee policies, and those are approved by city council, and then it carries through to labor negotiations and stuff of that nature as well. Just so you're aware of that background as you vote. My apologies for the late interjection.
Given that, then, can the motion this evening be to establish the holiday?
Certainly, to amend employee policies or et cetera, to do that, yes, we could certainly do that.
Mayor Pro Tem, would you like to amend your motion to amend city policy?
Yes.
And I will take that amendment as well as a seconder. So the motion is now to amend city policy, creating a paid holiday. Mr. Rogers.
So I'm hoping council will give me somewhat of a leeway with what I'm about to say. I appreciate Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas's comments. I appreciate Councilmember Douglas's comments. Those experiences resonate with me. I'm gonna just wear my heart on a sleeve here for a little bit. Juneteenth hits differently for me. A celebration is warranted, observation is warranted. But the experiences that I've lived through personally, my kids have lived through personally, for me to be in a position from where I've come from, and still to think that we've got so much farther to go, that for me, the holiday it's a holiday. It needs to be observed, but what else? But what else? I worry about the community that my kids grow up in. I've experienced certain levels of atrocities and racism and prejudice that I don't ever want my kids to go through. And the only way in my mind is we can all do better. How else do we support the day? How do we grow the day? How do we leave the next generation wanting to do better than what we set up? And that's my question, because it's just not about what we do today, it's about what we do going forward. Because I don't want my kids, I don't want Councilmember Douglas's, Mayor Pro Tem, anybody to have to experience that level of racism, hate. Juneteenth is the establishment of the Black community not being viewed in a certain light. It gave us the level of equity and equality under the 14th Amendment of our Constitution, and that is significant in my mind. And that is something that should be reflected, it should be cherished, it should be championed. Because it doesn't just stop with the Black community. It goes across the full spectrum of who we are as a people, as a person. So establishing a holiday, in my mind, is a good first step, but what do we do after that? Where do I point future generations? Where do I point my kids to be able to step back and say, you know what? We couldn't have had this family unless this occurred. We couldn't have been here without this. Cherish that, nurture that. Because I don't want us to backslide, not as a community, but as a country. So this day, straight up, hits differently for me. So I challenge myself, I challenge all of us. How do we do better? And how do we think about that? And how do we take that forward? And how do we, like I said, champion that in our community? How do we get it right? I want us to get it right so that future generations continue to keep building on that foundation.
That is the reason why I wrote some of what I wrote, which were, those words were then either taken out of context, misunderstood, or twisted. I don't know the motivations of people who responded. However, my intent from day one is exactly what Jason said. Let's get it right. Let's educate people so that they understand the significance of that day, so that they understand the significance of the racism that we still see today. That's why I said what I said. Let's get it right. Let's do this right. Let's make sure people understand. This morning, an employee asked Jason what Juneteenth was all about. That was a city employee who did not know the background, the reasons for it. That's the illustration of the education that we have to do. That's why I'm saying, let's get it right. Thank you.
Councilwoman Noble.
With all due respect, the 3 interns for Commerce City, and the first group of interns Commerce City has ever had, were assigned to research diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And they did so at other companies. And they spoke to me after the formal ceremony when they were thanked for their participation and thanked for providing a presentation to everyone. They said to me, why doesn't Commerce City have diversity, equity, and inclusion program? When were they released from that internship? I think maybe 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago? And I was actually kind of stunned because of the nature of Commerce City. There is much to be done. You're quite right about that, Mr. Tinklenberg. There's quite a bit to be done. And I think that this Juneteenth recognition of the holiday and why Juneteenth exists and what it commemorates is a good start. So I'm voting for it.
Is there any other discussion? Mr. Rogers, you and I spoke last week, and you shared with me similar sentiments when this conversation was addressed during our meeting. And again, I want to thank you for sharing your point of view. That's a point of view that I myself can never experience, and I appreciate you sharing that and being vulnerable enough to do so. I absolutely agree. This is not the be-all, end-all, but this is a step in the right direction. It's a small step. It's a long overdue step, but it is a step in the right direction. And yes, more work does need to be done. And I hope that over the course of the next year, 11 months, we can work together to come up with something that is befitting for this day. I have a motion and a second to amend the city employee policy handbook to create Juneteenth as a paid city holiday and no longer have city council business take place on the day it is recognized. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries unanimously. We're going to move on to our executive sessions. I'm looking for a motion and a second to enter into 3 executive sessions pursuant to CRS 24-6-402, parentheses 4, sub-parentheses E, for the purposes of determining position relative to a matter that may be subject to negotiations concerning incentives for potential economic development projects within the city, and pursuant to CRS 24-6-402, parentheses 4, sub-parentheses F, for the purpose of discussion of the mid-year evaluation of the city manager with staff and consultants, and CRS 24-6-402, parentheses 4, sub-parentheses B, for the purpose of receiving legal advice on Colorado House Bill 1024 and use tax exemptions for construction materials for public schools and providing direction to legal counsel. Councilmember Noble?
So moved.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Second.
Have a motion and a second to enter into the 3 executive sessions for the purposes stated. Is there any discussion? Mr. Tinklenberg?
Question for council, with Megan Grimes unable to attend, and at this point, we're not sure of Councilmember Hurst's expected arrival time. He was thinking that he might be able to join us at 8 o'clock. Do you want to proceed with the evaluation executive session without them or not? The past practice has been to not do that, and you wanted everyone to participate, but that is your decision.
Councilmember Madera?
Yeah, I prefer to have everyone since, he reports to the 9 of us and not, anyone or, anything less than that.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I have no problem proceeding because I think there's enough of us here to, I think, do a fair evaluation. So I'd like to continue.
Councilmember Noble?
I'd like to continue as well.
Councilmember Ford?
I think as a body, we should all be here.
Councilmember Douglas?
I would prefer to proceed, please.
Councilmember Davis?
I'm in agreement. I think we need to wait until the entire council's here.
You may want to break out your sessions into 3 separate votes based on what I heard right now and the numbers that I was counting in my head, because you have 3, rather than having this be as one motion.
All right. Yeah, I would much prefer to have all 9 of us here. I struggle with putting this off. It was already requested to be in the month of June, was put to this day, whenever it was supposed to originally be June 20th. But because of our work schedule, it ended up being June 27th. Now June 27th comes and it's kicked the can down the road again. And to be honest with you, I have a lot of issues that really need to be addressed. And the sooner the better. And I think that what I just heard, no, not more than 5 minutes ago, is a prime example of why we need to go into this executive session and have this conversation. So I'm in favor of us continuing. We do allow remote participation. If council members couldn't be here in person, they had the option of participating remotely. It's something that needs to take place. And it's unfortunate that not all 9 of us are here, but this is something that we can't continue to push down the road. So I will break it out into 3 different executive sessions so that we can have those different votes. So motion and a second to enter executive session for the economic development piece. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Do I need to motion? What's that? 5 of 7. Okay. Motion for the executive session. Can you speak up a little louder, please? Motion to executive session for the purpose of the economic incentive package. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Okay, that's 6-1. Okay, motion, 1 second for the executive session for the mid-year evaluation of the city manager. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Okay, that one will fail, 4-3. And executive session for legal advice on House Bill 1024. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. All right, that's going to go 7-0. We'll now enter an executive session. We'll return upon conclusion of the executive session to take action. The meeting broadcast and recording will remain up until we adjourn the meeting. Executive session is estimated to last approximately 2.5 hours.
Where are we going? Stand here, or you want to go any other one? You're set up there?
Oh, there's
Meeting is now adjourned. Have a good night. Have a good week. Happy Independence Day, and hope to see as many of you as possible out at Fourth Fest at the soccer stadium, and stick around for the fireworks after the soccer match. Have a good night.
We're done. Look at that.